let's talk about how we can color correct and color grade our footage in Premiere Pro. So I'm going to simplify this for our purposes, and color correction for us is just going to refer to any adjustments that we make to our exposure, so how bright or dark our image is, to how contrasty our image is, how saturated it is, and what the color balance looks like, so how warm our image is or how cool it is. Color grading is where we're going to develop a look for our video that kind of unifies all of our footage together. So before I do anything else, I want to get into a slightly better workspace for working on color. So I'm going to go to Window, Workspaces, and Color. And what we have is on our right side of our screen, we now have a Lumetri color panel, which is where we're going to do all of our color correction and our look development, our color grading. Then we have our program monitor here still, which is showing us what's going on in our timeline, and our project window over here, and then we have Lumetri scopes over here. Now yours might by default have your source monitor up still. If you have a tab that says Lumetri scopes, click on that, and if not, just go to window and make sure Lumetri scopes is checked. By the way, if you ever want to move a window into another part of the screen, what you can do is click and drag on the name of the window and then drop it wherever it turns purple. So if I drop it on an edge here, it's going to create another section for me. But if I drop it in the middle of a section that already exists, it's going to drop it into a tab in that section, and then we can adjust the size of that. But I want to keep my scopes over here, so I'm going to move them back. So in your scopes panel, if it doesn't look like this already, which it probably doesn't, we want to go into our settings. So click on this wrench, and we have all these options here. We want to choose waveform, and then we want to choose waveform type Luma. What this graph is showing us is what's happening in our image from left to right. So this left part of the graph refers to the left part of the image, and the right part refers to the right part of the image. Vertically, on the y-axis, what we're getting here is information about how bright or dark our image is. So let me show you an example. If I go over to this gradient, we have a smooth transition from near black to near white here. And we can see that that's happening over the horizontal space of the image. The exposure values near 0 are darker, and the exposure values near 100 are brighter. We want to try to keep all of our footage within this 0 to 100 range, and actually it'd be even better if we kept it between sort of 5 and 10 on the bottom end, and topping out around 90 at the top. Let's actually look at another clip here, and this is kind of an interesting way to see how the Lumetri scope works, how this waveform scope works. So if I play this through, you'll probably notice that we can see the people moving through the image. So as they move from right to left in the shot, they're moving from right to left at the same pace in the scope. We have all these dark pixels here that are clumped down at the bottom, and that's this curtain in the background. Then we have this really bright space here. That's our really bright screen. We have some bright areas on each of the people because they're all wearing white on top, and then we have some darker values where we're seeing their pants, which are darker. So if we go to our first shot that we want to color correct, I'm going to start by opening up my basic correction tab, and this is where I'm going to do all of my color correction. So let's go ahead and take a look at what each of these tools can do. I have a temperature slider which can make the image warmer or cooler, and if I double click on this slider, it's going to bring it right back to 0. I have tint, which I can use to make the image more magenta or more green. I have exposure, which I can use to make an overall adjustment to the brightness of the image, which you can see happening over here on our Lumetri scope. And then same thing in the opposite direction. Contrast is going to spread our scope out, so it's going to bring the darker values down and the brighter values up. Or we could do it in the opposite direction and take away contrast, and then it's going to bring the brighter values down and the darker values up. If I pull on my white slider, this is going to affect the brightest areas of my image, and it's going to bring them up toward the top of the graph. And I can do that in the opposite direction as well. With blacks, it's going to either raise the level of our darkest pixels or lower it. And then shadows fall between blacks and midtones. And I can pull those up or down. And highlights fall between midtones and whites, and I can pull that up or down. And then I have a saturation slider where I can add more saturation to the image or take saturation away. So for this image, I feel like the temperature is okay. I might try to add just a little bit of warmth to it. And then the tint, I really feel like we're pretty good where the camera had us, so I'm going to leave that at 0. Exposure looks okay to me. I might bring down the blacks just a little bit. We're hovering a little bit above 10 here. I think I'll just pull that down till it's at about just a little bit below 10. And that looks pretty good to me. And then the last thing I want to do is just add a touch of saturation. So I'm going to bring this up to like 120 or so. And then I'm going to move on to the next clip. And looks like we can bring down the blacks a little bit. And then maybe raise the shadows just a touch. Bring the blacks down a little bit more. And then I think this image needs to be considerably warmer. It's very cool in the shadows here, and there's almost a blue cast on our subjects here. I'm just going to drag up just a little bit. That looks pretty good. I'll bring up the saturation to maybe like 130. Mess around with tint a little bit. Maybe just a little bit of magenta in here. That looks alright to me. So then I'm going to go to my last image here. This one really feels like it has a green cast on it. Obviously there's a lot of green in the image, but I think we need to both warm it up and add a little bit of magenta. So I'm going to start by warming it up. And then I'll just add a tiny bit of magenta till it looks natural to me. That looks pretty good. And then I'm going to bring my blacks down just a touch. Bring my shadows up a little bit. Blacks down a little bit more. I might drag my highlights down just a little bit here too. And then I'm going to add some saturation. That looks pretty good. So the key when making your basic color corrections is you want to be subtle with it. You don't want to, drag the temperature slider all the way up or all the way down. You want to find a nice balance. The idea here is just to make these clips match a little bit better in terms of color. I might actually add a little bit of magenta to this. Okay, that looks better. So these clips right now match pretty well in terms of color. The next thing I'm going to do is try to unify these clips a little bit more by doing some color grading. I'm going to add a look that is consistent throughout all three of them. So the first thing that's really important to understand when you're doing this is that all of these corrections that I made here in my basic correction panel, they get translated into an effect. So if I go over to my effect controls, you can see this Lumetri color effect. And if I toggle this effects button here on and off, you can see that's without the correction and that's with the correction. And if I delete this completely, it's gone. I can hit Control Z and undo. Or if I delete it, I can always make those corrections again over here. And all of these corrections that we're making are non-destructive with this effect. So if I click away from this clip and then I go back to it, you can see that my adjustments are still in here. I can change them if I want to. It's not affecting the clip permanently. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my project window and I want to create what's called an adjustment layer. So I'm going to right click outside of any other clip. So if I try to click on a clip, I won't have the option to create an adjustment layer. I need to be in an empty space. So I'm going to say new item and adjustment layer, click OK. And then I'll drag it in here into video track 2 and then pull it over all three of these clips. And this is doing absolutely nothing so far. It's just a transparent layer that can hold effects like Lumetri Color, and it will affect all of the clips that are underneath of it. So I'm going to click on my adjustment layer, and then I'm going to go into my Creative tab. And here I'm going to choose a look for my project. So I'm going to go down here and maybe pick this Fuji Superior, and then I can just kind of look through all of these by hitting this arrow, and you'll see a little preview in this box. I'm just going to keep going until I find something that I like. So I think that looks pretty good. And then if I click on it, it's going to apply the effect. Now I want to make some changes to it. This effect made everything a little too contrasty for my taste. This is a really dark area down here. It's really bright here, and it just kind of looks too crunchy to me. So one thing that I can do is I can just drag down the intensity of this and kind of back off how much of this look is being applied. And that actually works pretty well in this case. The other thing I can do is I could go back into my basic correction and make a change here. I could say lower the contrast, maybe bring the blacks back up a little bit, bring my highlights down a little bit, and that looks pretty good. That gives me a little bit more fine-tuned control over my image, so that's the way that I generally prefer to do it. So I'll go in here and check this one out too. I think, again, I'm going to pull up my scope so I can see. But I think, yeah, we need to bring up our blacks just a little bit. Actually, quite a bit there. Maybe bring up the shadows even more. And that looks all right to me. And then in this last clip, same thing. We're just too contrasty for my taste. So I'm going to bring the blacks up, bring the shadows up a little bit more, bring my highlights down a little bit more, maybe even drop my overall exposure down. And then it looks too warm to me now too, so I'm going to back the temperature slider off a little bit. And that looks better. And I'll play through it now, and you can see this is what it looks like with the adjustment layer on. And here's with the adjustment layer off. And back on again. You can just see that it all looks a little bit more finished now, a little bit more polished. So that's it for now. That's as deep as we're going to go into color correction and color grading. Remember, color correction happens on your primary piece of footage in the basic correction tab of Lumetri Color, and our color grading happens in the creative tab of an adjustment layer's Lumetri Color effect. So as always, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions, and I can't wait to see what you all create.